Hello, everybody. Episode 6. This is brought to you by The Free Agent. We're sitting here with Steve Quehl. Thanks for joining, Steve.
Great to be with you, Bo.
Yeah. So we brought Steve in because he's a chief revenue officer or outsourced CRO, if you will. And I know a lot of folks out there are struggling with pipeline management. What is a pipeline? How do you institute one? When does it even make sense? And how can you maintain one? And being that I'm a small company myself, pipeline management is something that I'm continuously trying to kind of improve, get better at, continuously iterate. And it's not the easiest chore. And I use the word chore kind of loosely because it's something nobody wants to do. But at the end of the day, it's something you've got to do. It's part of the blocking and tackling of having a company. So at any rate, Steve, I really appreciate you joining.
Happy to be here. This is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. So if you can just give us a quick and dirty 30 seconds on kind of who you are and why people should tune in.
Graduated into sales management and then into general management. As the industry developed and as companies developed, and I took the role as either chief sales officer or chief operating officer in a variety of early stage, mid-stage, and public companies across that time span.
Sure.
Moved to Atlanta in 2000 to run an internet software company just about the time the dot bomb blew up in everyone's face. And so that was the point at which I was encouraged to go and offer my services as a fractional or interim advisor, CRO, CSO, COO to early stage technology companies. And I did that for a period of time independently.
Sure.
After about a 5-year period of traveling everywhere across the country, I stayed in Atlanta and bought a business. Did that for a number of years until the Great Recession hit, then decided I need to sell that and go back to work in this same space. So I joined a firm called Tech CXO, which is a company that offers the full suite of fractional and advisory services across all functions: sales, marketing, technology, finance, et cetera. So I'm one of the partners at Tech CXO today.
Got it. And needless to say that pipeline management must be kind of in your core, especially as kind of making it through the Great Recession, right?
You can't get away from it. And as much as we've talked about it and focused on it, and often through the lens of the many tools that are out there to help manage pipelines, I think one of the things that our discussion prompted is just a visit with the fundamentals and the reasons why you want to do this, and think about what you're going to put in place in terms of process before you try to automate something.
I totally agree. And I think that's a good segue into the actual topic here. And so, of course, we collaborated on a blog post, and this is just kind of a continuum of that blog post where we just wanted to get on the horn here, via video and just kind of run through a few questions. So in that vein, pipeline management, process, why is a pipeline necessary for a growing business?
Your pipeline is your view into the future. It's a leading indicator for any company in terms of the health. And it's really there to help you formalize the development and the transition of all of your potential revenue opportunities. When they come in the door as a lead, what do they do to gestate and materialize then with revenue? There's a lead time there. There's a sales cycle, if you will, or a buyer cycle. And there are steps within that, and you have to know where you are with every prospect along the way in order to know, okay, where's the money going to come from? Absolutely. And so if you don't have that formalized process, everything is a scientific wild ass guess.
Yeah, totally agree. And also too, you mentioned where's the revenue going to come from, but with that information, it can also put you in a position where you can invest the money back into your business. Because you're more educated on when it's coming, what's coming in, and then you can kind of start looking at how you can best allocate those resources to help your business continue to grow. Right.
Well, again, back to the forward-looking aspect here. When you have to plan your cash and plan your investments in whether it's hiring people, expanding your business, adding functions to the business, whatever, those things take cash. Right. And you need to plan in advance. So you need to see that there is that flow of capital coming into your business from customer revenue. And so you have to have lead times and understand what those lead times are, because you don't hire a salesperson and turn them into a productive individual overnight. There's a lead time there. So knowing that you've got the cash to support that run up to that productivity is important.
Agreed. And I think too, it can also put a fire behind somebody's behind, because if you're sitting there and you're looking, 60, 90, 120 days out, and you don't necessarily see some liquidity event or cash coming in from your business, then as a sales leader, obviously that's going to prompt some discussions with your sales team and help you kind of roll up your sleeves a little bit in order to kind of help further drive the sales activity. So 30, 60, 90, 120 days out, you actually have the cash flow that you need to sustain the business.
Absolutely. And you're looking for early warning. You're looking for signals of delay, because delay is the enemy in that regard. And you don't want to be surprised at any given point in time. I mean, you think about the CEO who walks into the boardroom and projects a forecast on a given quarter.
Right.
The first time he or she is wrong may be forgivable. The second or third time is not. And all of a sudden there's undue pressure, and
right.
Sometimes really bad things happen. So the way around that is to have the visibility that we're talking about here, not only to make those forecasts accurately, but to meet them.
Agreed. And I think it's a great point. So moving on to the next question in regards to a pipeline, I think a lot of times you think of pipelines more so mature companies, but growth companies, startups, I mean, this is a critical component to their success. And I'd probably argue that it's maybe even more critical for the success of a growing business than it is for maybe a more mature organization, because they don't have the cash flow that's coming in that maybe a larger company does.
Indeed. And, I don't care whether it's a new company, early stage company, and you might only have a handful of opportunities, but they're all crucial, and you can't afford not to
Right.
Land every one of them. Or whether you've got 5,000 accounts each quarter, in which case the task of managing and monitoring all those activities and events, because the stakes are much higher. Either way, the stakes are high. And again, it's all about the visibility, and it's all about meeting commitments that you made, whether to your board, to your stakeholders, to your customers in many cases, knowing how you're going to be able to respond to what that future holds, and be able to look out that 18 months and say, okay, we're on a run rate here that we can sustain. And that's really key.
Absolutely. And again, too, going back to an earlier point, for me, it helps me track, kind of ROI and put together a business case for investment. So I've got to have visibility into what's coming in, not even just this month, but in the next 2, 3, 4 months. And the pipeline is a critical component to that. So getting a little bit more tactical, how does a company that maybe doesn't have a pipeline in place, how would they actually go about creating a pipeline?
Let's put it in the context of, I think in the case you're asking there, an early stage technology company, perhaps that is just now formalizing its process, and has maybe it's on the verge of that sacred product market fit, and it's all of a sudden figured out there's a market opportunity there, and there's something here that we can do and build on a repetitive basis. It's really important to understand the nature of your buyer. And the buyer, in this case, it has a profile. And so it's important to understand what that ideal buyer looks like, and put that in place, and really study what makes the right kind of prospect for this business. Because in the aspiration to achieve repeatability, you don't want to be shooting at anything that moves. You want to be able to target a very specific profile, aim your fire, and put your people in place with a sales playbook that calls them to run plays consistently and repeatably against this ideal customer profile. Now, this profile is going to follow a pattern. Typically, we call it the buyer's journey. In the old days, when I was growing up in sales, we used to talk about a sales cycle. We used to talk about defining all the stages of a selling cycle.
Absolutely.
And it might be an introduction, it might be a presentation, it might be a demonstration, it might be a proposal, it might be a win. Well, the buyers don't think in those terms. They think in terms of, okay, do I really have a problem? Oh my, well, this problem is real and it's costing me a lot of money. And I better go figure out how to solve this. So I might go, so they're out there evaluating, first of all, their internals. They're looking at an approach to solving this problem. They're evaluating alternatives. And because of the internet today, they can do lots of research before they invoke or bring aboard an organization from whom they might choose to buy something or several in a competitive bidding process.
Right.
So they may be 40 to 50 to 60% through a sales cycle, a buyer cycle, if you will, before a salesperson can ever show up. So
great point.
That salesperson's at a loss going in. They need to understand where those buyers are. They need to know where those buyers are headed and how they're going to make decisions, because especially in complex sales, those decisions are very political and they're committee based. And there's many different individuals, and we would refer to those as personas that have to be addressed, each with their own different focus on the problem that they had identified. And so in many respects, there's a lot of mini sales cycles that have to take place, conversations that have to occur in order to create what we would then require as a consensus, because it is a consensus. Any one of those individuals, if there are, and I think the average now today in the complex sale environment is so upwards of 7 to 8 people who have to say yes before you can win a deal.
Right.
So knowing where each one of those is in their buying process is critical, and being able to present your value proposition in terms that will resonate with them is really important. All these things are steps in your selling process. All of these things require time, assets, individuals, and timing in order to present those according to a normalized time frame. We call that, again, the sales cycle, the average sales cycle. And that could be upwards anywhere from a month to 2 years, depending upon the complexity of the product that you're selling. So again, parsing that out, making that very clear, and then training salespeople in how to progress through that, and involving the entire team, the entire corporation, from product management, marketing, finance. Everybody has to have visibility into this process, because again, back to that complex nature, you've got many of these moving parts in many different organizations simultaneously progressing through this pipeline. You got to know where each one of those is at any given moment in their buying process in order to be able to rationally predict where it's going to end up for you. Now, the other thing is, you're not going to win every deal,
right?
No matter what.
Yeah.
So you have to create a coverage model for yourself. I'll call it insurance. I'll call it a hedge. So if you know from your experience in more recent times that it's going to take, I'm going to win 2 out of every 4 deals. I've got a 50% run rate. Well, I better have 4 deals in the pipeline to get the 2 that I expect. Any one of them is a potential to close, but the odds are 2 of them are going to fall out. One is going to get delayed. Another company might get acquired. That deal goes away. You're then, you have to rely on those other 2 in order to cover the number that you projected in your forecast. So
absolutely.
Again, I'm rambling a little bit here, but again, it's bigger than a bread box.
No,
the
I think
processes that go into this are crucial, and understanding not just at the sales level, not just at the sales management level, but at the leadership level of the organization, all the way up to and including the board of directors, knowing how this team effort functions in order to make this business opportunity materialize is crucial.
I think it's a great point, and I think there's a big misnomer, in regards to sales, that even a monkey can do it. But sales really, especially when you talk about complex sales, gets quite scientific, and we're talking about personas. And a lot of times you think about personas as it pertains to marketing, but absolutely you need that within the sales process as well. And to your point, a customer may have gotten 50% of their decision criteria done by the time they even reach out to have a demo from you. And so it's very, very important for an organization to track the typical buying process. And when they get contacted with somebody, they're able to put somebody within one of those, call it 9 steps as an example. And so if somebody's already gotten a demo, you're not starting them on step 1 because you're going to lose them. You're starting them appropriately at step 5 or step 6 naturally, because they've already done all the due diligence, and then taken through the process.
Right.
So I think it's very, very complex, and people don't understand the nuances and what's involved for an effective pipeline. And also to your point, kind of getting into the ratios, you've got to be able to kind of, track what you've done the last 3, 6, 9 months, even 12 years, look back, and then kind of derive percentages. So moving forward, you're able to effectively know, what your win-loss ratio is, what's going to come through the pipe effectively, because that's what is the basis for actually planning and usually utilizing your cash flow to make investments in the business. So it's way more complex, and the pipeline is the backbone for all the decisions, even those financially driven by the CFO.
That's absolutely right. And again, it's a process. It's a process that must account for the individual buyer and their proclivities, buyers, plural, and their proclivities and how they make decisions. And remember, they don't make these decisions for a living. We may sell for a living and have a process that we think should be pat, but they don't. And that's why it's very circuitous. And all you have to do is go look at Gartner Group's depiction of a buyer's journey, which is a convoluted spaghetti diagram, and recognize that, as this tortuous path that they all follow, you have to have an organization that is lean and capable of administering the information and the confidence that's going to be required for those buyers to move from one step to the next. That has to be institutionalized, and it has to be taught, and it has to be managed and overseen in a very disciplined fashion from top management down.
Totally agreed. And I think that's a good segue into the next question, which we partially answered, but I'd still like to bring it up just to further kind of emphasize the importance here. So, do you need to create a pipeline from multiple business offerings, customers, or even sales cycles, right? So, i.e., is there a different customer journey, customer map? Should there be a different scenario for the different kind of product offerings that a company may have within their organization?
I think that's a choice that each business needs to decide based upon the nature of their market, the nature of their value proposition, the nature of their buyer. And it certainly varies from the standpoint of, and again, I'll go back to the early stage technology company who is selling a complex solution to a large scale organization. For them, the most expensive sale is a new account.
Right.
But once they have an account, they have an opportunity to grow that account, with add-on sales or expansion revenue that comes from building, bringing new product into that same customer, adding modules or adding features as a time. So those are less expensive sales. So at the very least, I always recommend that companies distinguish between new account business and add-on business. But with respect to a very mature organization that has multiple lines of business potentially, maybe different selling models going on concurrently. Some may be channel driven, some may be direct, some may be, self-serve from the client themselves. Again, depending on the nature of the product, the nature of the way the product is bought. That should dictate the degree to which you have separate or isolated pipeline systems. And then usually you're in line of business management at that point. Mm-hmm. Then you're usually, looking at divisional or P&L based cash flow models.
I think that's a great point. Absolutely big believer that if you have multiple service offerings or, you have new account, reps that are focused on new accounts and, more so the kind of the account management, there should be different pipelines because inherently the way that the customer should go through the customer buying journey is going to be different. So what you need to supply to them along the kind of continuum, is going to be different from, new business development as a contrast to account management. One thing that I want to underscore that you brought up a second ago, and I think a lot of people don't understand this as well, is how hard new customer acquisition actually is. And I don't want to say it's easy, but if you have an existing account, it's a much lighter lift to kind of cross-sell and upsell once you have the paper signed, you've established trust, and you've established credibility. And it's funny how most companies that I talk to, they're solely focused on net new business, which is important. But also, too, are you providing the proper service to your customers, and have you kind of maximized the growth potential within those respective accounts?
Well, that's obviously a key point here. Again, for a new business, a growth company, an early stage technology company that's getting ready to hit the gas and scale the business, it's really important for them to show success in those new logos.
Absolutely.
But there's a long road to profitability
Yeah.
in that regard. And profitability may not be the driver. Revenue may be the driver. New accounts may be the driver. But at some point, because revenue is not revenue, but profit all of a sudden and cash flow, positive cash flow, hopefully, becomes the driver. You have to be able to manage the timing and the nature of the way these sales are mapped out. So to your point, yes, you want to be able to distinguish not only the timing, but the profitability of the revenue coming in the door. Because at the end of the day, when you roll up that to a forecast, the revenue components thereof, they're not necessarily distinguishable inside, but when it all drops to a bottom line, that's when you start to read and see how important it is to be able to really do this in a very efficient manner.
Agreed. Absolutely. Cool. So 2 more questions, Steve. Thanks for being a trooper here. So how can a growth company institute a pipeline both quickly and effectively? Is it about kind of mapping that customer journey, getting the personas? Is that kind of the first step here?
That's the starting point. And again, I think this is a whole company effort, quite frankly. I think creating that ideal customer profile and mapping that buyer journey, which requires study, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of trial and error at the beginning.
Absolutely.
But after you get ready. But I think now we start to look at creating the collaboration model inside the organization between, say, product management and marketing and sales, and making sure that if there is a lead generation process, for example, from marketing, and that there's a handoff of a marketing qualified lead to sales, that there is an agreement between marketing and sales between what constitutes a good lead or not. And by the same token, when sales accepts a lead and they've agreed that this is a sales qualified lead, that there is a purposeful process by which they will go and essentially process that lead and report back to marketing, so that continuing engine, can be tuned at the same time. That goes behind the scenes.
Right.
But now that we're in the game, it's incumbent upon the sales management organization to ensure that there is a rigorous, disciplined process in place to monitor the progress that occurs on a daily basis, quite frankly. It may be reported or studied weekly in one-on-ones and discussions between salespeople and sales management. But that progress has to be understood. That plan has to be in place for next steps. The execution of those next steps has to be reported out. And the accountability, for meeting that number is created with those building blocks. So we can see if there's breakdowns, where in that process did it occur. So putting those building blocks in place, certainly at the sales level, the sales management level, and then raising that back up to show, okay, here are the early warnings for problems, delays, but we've got coverage over here, and here's a new situation that has now come in, it has accelerated a bit. So we've got balance in our equation, and we have early warning to any risk to meeting that number at the end. That process is ongoing. It's perpetual. It should be daily at the sales organization. And I think the one point we want to make is that it's important that the information be gotten out of the heads of the salespeople into forms, into whether it's a digital or spreadsheet form, doesn't really matter, because they're notoriously poor at maintaining this. They're out doing stuff, right?
Agreed.
Documenting is not their strength, but it's important to get the information out so it can be studied and shared, analyzed, and when problems arise, remediated, and put them in a situation where they're doing what they do best, and brought back into the organization for, again, evaluation and confidence that that number is going to be met.
Totally agree. I think, what I'd like to underscore is your use of the word continuous education. And, sales is getting leads from marketing, but they're not communicating back to marketing, the validity of the leads. Right. They're good, they're poor, they're mediocre. How's marketing going to be effective at driving good leads? And so, you got to have a continuous feedback loop so everybody knows what's going on and what the quality of the output coming in actually is. Without that, right, it's all for naught.
Absolutely.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in the old days, it was like getting dogs and cats to live together, marketing and sales. Today,
I don't think much has changed, but
but in terms of what has to happen, and this is a leadership issue from the CEO down,
yeah.
bringing them into the same room and holding them accountable to the same standards is key. Compensation alignment does that for you, by the way.
Agreed.
But ensuring that that feedback loop is there, putting them both in charge of the destiny of the company, so to speak, by delivering what they promise is important. And I think at some point, the two can become indistinguishable because of the collaborative processes that they're bringing to bear. And I think that's critical in terms of organizational development.
Absolutely. It starts with accountability, and a lot of that comes down to compensation, but that's a topic for another day, right?
Right.
So finally, what's the ongoing maintenance of a pipeline, and how can you ensure this is prioritized? I think you made a great point earlier about it comes from the CEO top down, but how do you keep this top of mind and really kind of drill into, I guess, your middle line managers and below how important pipeline is? Because, when people think of pipeline, it's usually, it's another TPS report, the chief, revenue officer, or somebody just needs this for, some philosophical reason, but obviously it's much more than that. So how do you keep this prioritized, keep it top of mind, and help the sales folks understand the importance that pipeline is what keeps them employed?
Not only that, it gets them paid, and I think that's really the key. If you tie it to their compensation, I mean, salespeople are typically compensated on the basis of some combination of salary and incentive.
Right.
You get paid a salary for a reason. And maybe this is one of the reasons why you get paid a salary, is to do these administrative tasks that are necessary to input data to the system and ensure that the reporting that comes out of that is accurate.
Right.
And again, when that doesn't happen, there's a difficult conversation that may have to occur. And the longer it happens, the less likely they are to hold that position. So I think that's a starting point. It's discipline, and it's management discipline as well as individual contributor discipline. So that's key. But that's, again, a philosophical point that has to be maintained from the top. It's just one of those things that has to be done. It's hygiene, and it's the absence of it creates interesting things up to and including diseases that don't want to spread through the organization.
Absolutely. Agreed. Awesome. Well, cool, Steve. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time today. That kind of wraps up our Q&A session, but it's been extremely informative for me personally. And so I'm sure there's many organizations out there that are going to benefit from this conversation. So truly appreciate you joining today.
I'm happy to. It was fun. Look forward to more.
Awesome. Thank you,
Take
sir.
care. Bye now.